Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good day to you all. My name is Adam, and this is Weekend Watch Repair, and I am super glad that you stopped by. Well, I hope you're in for a long one because we have a heck of a project on our hands today. What we have is a Seiko Bullhead model 61380049 from July of 1976. Stating the obvious, you can see there our stem is snapped and our crown is missing, and so this watch belongs to a very nice gentleman named Jeff. Now, Jeff is a United States Marine, and he has quite a history with this watch. And the reason it has all that road rash that you're looking at right there on the bezel, and the crown is missing, the stem is snapped, and you'll notice the chronograph subregister minute counter hand is missing, is because Jeff was in a 100 plus mile an hour motorcycle accident while wearing this watch. Now, Jeff, it must be just a incredibly tough person, and Marines generally are. Thankfully, he survived, and but this watch did not fare as well. So this watch, obviously, was in a massive impact, and that was over 35 years ago. And so this watch has sat in a drawer as we are looking at it now for that entire time. Jeff reached out, said he had this watch. He'd love to see it going again, and I just couldn't turn down the opportunity to work on it. I love working on bullheads. So we're going to see what a 100-mile-an-hour motorcycle accident plus 35 years of being stored without a crown does to a watch. So I hope you're in for a long one because this video is. But I hope you stick with me on this. We do a lot of work on this watch. So in talking with Jeff about this project, and first off, Jeff, thank you for your patience waiting for me to get to this. He contacted me well over 6 months ago to work on this thing, and we finally get to it. But we're going to go ahead and first off remove the bracelet. So when talking with Jeff, and before I ever saw it, he told me, he's like, I saw photos of it, and he said, all the like the hand and all that should be in there. He said, Adam, this watch, and so this watch is, according to Jeff, has never been serviced. And at the time, he had believed, and good night, look at all that stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of arm cheese inside that bracelet. Jeff wore this watch a bunch while it was running, but taking a look at those spring bars, some of those are on their very last leg. So definitely time to replace those. So we'll go ahead and open this case up. So Jeff had told me, he said, this watch has never in its life been serviced. And so, and to his knowledge, he believed it had never been opened. There is a mark on the case back, and someone had made an attempt to open it at some point, but Jeff assures me, he said, this watch has never once been serviced. So that's going to be really exciting to actually get into this thing. Go ahead and take this case back off. Take a look at what we have here. Initial impressions look pretty good. It's pretty clean. So with the obvious, attempt at some point to remove the case back due to that scratch, but having a non-service watch, I'm really excited to actually get into this thing and see what it looks like. Just checking the play on the bearing, and it didn't actually look too bad. There's not really much in the way of wear marks along the edges of the bridge. When that rotor bearing becomes loose and worn out over time, that rotor will tilt further and further and start rubbing the bridges and rub the plating off, but you don't really see much of that here. First thing we're going to do is remove this movement ring, and if memory serves, I had a heck of a time getting this movement ring out. It was being a bit stubborn, but I don't want to go prying on it, so we'll just kind of gradually work at it, and eventually it will come loose. There is a spring attached to that movement ring, and what that does is it is used to compress between the movement ring and the case back as it's screwed down. And so if that spring isn't there, what'll happen is that movement will just ever so slightly move around inside that case, even when everything's tightened up. That tension spring there just tightens everything up, makes it where nothing moves. It's a really important component, but the alloy that spring is made of is generally one of if you're going to get rust in a watch, that's one of the very first things that will rust. Go ahead and remove our pushers. Here comes our first one. Notice my spring didn't come out with it. But yeah, that gasket is dead flat, and that's what an original gasket would look like at this point. Go ahead and pull this second one out. Take a look at it. About the same. And this camera view you're looking at now, that's not the view I have in front of me. I'm kind of sitting perpendicular to this watch from the view of this camera. So I reach in here to grab my spring that I think should be in there. And yeah, well, there's no spring. So, I was wondering, like, how in the world does that happen? I actually sent it to Jeff, and he's like, yeah, at some point, maybe that thing may have popped off at some point. He's like, man, maybe we just push the pusher back in, but those things are generally retained by the movement ring. So it's possible the case was removed just to kind of put that pusher back in place, but the spring never made it back. Either way, doesn't really matter. But what we would do have a challenge in front of us is that our stem is snapped. So I'm going to press down on the setting lever plunger and try to dislodge the stem from that, and just using a second set of tweezers to work it out. But we got it out. And there we have one broken stem, hair and dust and all that jazz. Now we can go ahead and remove the movement from the case. So we'll flip it over, and I give them a few little love taps. Let's pull this thing away. And yeah, that's what original Seiko loom of, be about 49 years at this point is going to look like. So the first thing I'm looking at is I'm trying to find our missing hand, because I didn't see it underneath the crystal. I looked all over for the hand before I took the watch apart, and I couldn't find it. So I'm thinking maybe it's just kind of wedged in between that inner black ring, that rehaut, and the bezel or something, but it's just not there. So that hand may have found its way outside of the case when it was open at one point, but nevertheless, it is not there now. So I'm going to put a different crown and stem in here from a different Seiko just to give it some function, and I want to try to align the hands up, but I immediately notice a problem.
Ooh.
What we have is that minute hand actually touching some of the indices when I rotate it in a certain direction. So I'm just kind of playing with it to see if I can replicate. And right there at the 3 o'clock indice and then back to 2, right there, it actually touches the marker on the dial. And so if we go sideways with the view here, you can see that chronograph, the seconds hand is actually bent downwards, that hour hand is pressed pretty far down, and that minute hand is kind of bent downwards towards the tip. But all the hands on this watch are kind of, however that impact affected this watch, it all kind of pressed them downwards towards the dial in some fashion. So we're just going to kind of remove the hands without really lining everything up, but they're in a spot where the hand pullers can get in there and do it. So not a huge deal. But we will have to address those hands and straighten them out the best we can. But we're going to try to keep this watch as original as possible. I don't want to replace the hands if we can repair them, so we'll do our best. Checking out the sub-register hands and the chronograph seconds hands, you can see how the pinions on those are kind of cut into a little, they're shaped so they cut into those hand tubes when they're removed. So those cannot really be adjusted to different positions.
Whoa, that's loose.
Yeah, that one was loose. Sorry, I left some original audio in there. So those can't really be adjusted into different positions once they're married. So once you press those hands on fully, they are in that spot. So they have to be set right from the beginning.
That one is not.
That's a common thing we're going to see in this video, is that there's a lot of loose screws in this video, or in this watch. And obviously, I think due to the impact it received, and I think it was maybe a bit of a glancing blow, really, with that motorcycle accident. I don't think this thing took the brunt of the accident, but it received a lot of energy in that crash to do some of the things that it did to this watch. We'll go ahead and check the codes. The case shows 6/4, so that is April of 1976. The case back shows July of 1976. That is a correct dial to this case, to the 0049 case. Usually you'll see the dials between 1 to 3 months production earlier than the case. But with this replacement crown in there for now, which is not the correct crown for the watch or stem for that matter, but it does function, we can actually give this thing a test and give it a wind. So one kind of funny thing Jeff told me, we were doing this and he loves this watch. He said, I said, you ever, so this watch is just set in a drawer the entire time. He said, well, a few times, like I'll wait during the day to, until the time that's on the watch matches the actual time of day and then shake it up real fast and then just wear it for a while because you don't have a crown. There's really not much you can do. So I thought that was pretty funny. I never would have thought to do that, but that's a man who likes his watch. He's going to wear it even without a crown. Just wait till the time is right. So we go ahead and put a wind on this thing. And that amplitude is just horrendously low. So I wanted to make sure that it felt like I had a full wind in it, but we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to wind it a little bit more just to make sure I have I have this thing topped off. And when you do top off the wind, the immediate results you get on a time graph for your amplitude is going to give it a boost for like 30 to 40 seconds, and it'll eventually settle back down. See how that amplitude just jumped up 50 degrees and then it's just going to work its way back down. But we're running pretty fast. Beat air is actually not terrible, but in changing positions, it's going to start to get progressively worse. And as the rate gets worse and worse and worse, that amplitude becomes less and less believable. We'll put it in a vertical position and then it just becomes atrocious. There's just no way that amplitude's 200 right there. That's just not even remotely correct. And I think it's just due to how wildly that rate is slow. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at this thing. And so we can see how that balance is running. And I think that 130, 140 amplitude number, if you look at that roller jewel, the impulse jewel on the other side of the roller table, that's 130, 140 at best. So there's no way that 200 or 240 amplitude was even accurate. But you can take a look at the balance. We've also got a little bit of wobble in our balance. So that's far from the worst. And I honestly expected this thing to potentially have a busted, balance staff. But if we have a bent balance wheel, if that's repairable, that's not the end of the world. I expect worse, to be honest, after what this watch went through. So taking a look at everything before we start, and I'm really looking at the screw heads. And so if this watch has never been serviced, and this is, 49 years old, take a look at these screw heads and you can see there's no tool marks in them. These screws are not a super hardened steel. Like it doesn't take a whole lot to mar a screw head on these watches. And so, this watch this has never come apart. If it did, it hasn't, it's just, this is an unserviced 49-year-old Seiko Bullhead, but you can already see we have some rust there on that pin where the operating lever spring, where the retaining pin for that's actually not a screw. That's just a post riveted onto that operating lever. But we are going to see a little bit of rust issues, and there's an oxide layer that's formed on a lot of parts that we'll see here in a bit. You saw a little bit of it there. Some of them are heavily layered with an oxide layer, which is one of the first stages in rust formation. But we will address that. Those two screws holding the automatic works bridge on there were very loose, extremely loose, actually. Take a look at the balance wheel. We'll go ahead and throw an arrow up there. Watch this balance wheel as we unwind this watch. Boom. See how it just stopped immediately? That is not good. We'll have to figure out what's going on there. But we have power removed, so we can go ahead and remove our balance. Just gently lifting it up.
Anxiety is what I feel when I burn a pot roast.
Wow.
Yep, that first screw was loose.
Nausea, unspeakable dread. Terms, the fear
So you may hear some popping in the background. And I believe this is right about July 4th when I was filming this. So there's some fireworks going on.
All three.
Yep, all three of them.
Sorry.
So the city I live in, during July 4th, they allow fireworks, although people rarely stop spouting them off at, I think, 9 or 10 p.m. whenever they have to stop it down. So that's if it's on a work night, it's kind of difficult to get some sleep. But So yeah, that was some fireworks you heard in the background. People having a little fun on July 4th. Chronograph bridge comes off. There is an issue with that we will find later, but we can begin disassembly. And so, first off, I'll take this opportunity to say, hey, I appreciate all the feedback on the last video. So the last video also had a 6138 movement in it. It was not a bullhead though. It was a UFO. And I was actually mentioned this watch because at the time I published that video, this watch was on the way. And, I wasn't planning on filming it because, it's basically the same movement that was in the last video. Although this one here, and at the time I didn't know what I was going to find in it. This one here has completely different fixes. And there's a large section of this video that's going to be some material that we've never really shown on the channel before. Something I want to do a bit different, but and real quick, you can see this. Look at that layer of junk on that hammer. Goodness. But I requested, one of the few times I asked for people to, sincerely leave a comment and let me know because I was on the fence about filming this thing because it's it's a commitment to film these watches and to edit them. And at least for me, it takes me forever. But try to make these really detailed videos. And I was like, I don't know if folks would want to see it. Although it's a different watch, it's the same movement. And that's the nuts and bolts of these videos. But a lot of people replied, to my surprise. And, I think I forget sometimes. I forget. I mean, there's 20,000 something people watch that video. And there's 100 or 200 or 300 people or something like that left comments about if they want to see it. And the overwhelming majority, 90, it's got to be like 95, 98% of them said, do it. And so that really surprised me. So real quick, just checking the side shake of the barrel. And we got a little bit of play in there. We're going to go ahead and I spoke with Jeff. We're doing a jewel upgrade on this watch. I'm going to go ahead and test the end shake on this because this is one thing I was really curious about after what this watch went through was what the end shake on the wheel train would look like. If it would have been affected, I didn't know. So third wheel actually looked pretty good. That looks like a lot of movement. We are zoomed into a ridiculous degree, but that's actually not bad at all. Checking our center wheel. And the amount of travel looks okay, but it is really tough to move. And there's no power on the wheel train, and it should not be that tough. End shake on the bridge, the barrel looks pretty good. I don't like how high it's riding up on the pinion on that center wheel, but that is still okay. But otherwise, that's actually quite surprising. Our clutch and plate on the chronograph wheel is actually dead straight, which is thankfully that is the most expensive piece of this watch to get a replacement part for by a factor of 3. That's an expensive part, and they are not really repairable. There's a few different forum posts, pages and pages long, going back 10, 15 years at least, of people talking about those wheels. Can you repair them? Multiple people have tried. I've seen people disassemble them. I've tried to disassemble. I have disassembled some broken ones. Because what'll happen generally when those are busted, it's either that plate gets bent or the wheel itself is just kind of staked onto a shoulder on the center post, and that can come loose. And when that does, it's just shot. There's really no way to reassemble them correctly. I don't think I've ever seen one person. I've seen people build good wheels out of multiple bad ones a few times. I've never had multiple bad ones to test, but that's not a part that's generally repairable. And replacements are really expensive. But I was getting off track there. My apologies. So just thank you to everyone who left a comment on there. The overwhelming majority of people in the last video said they wanted to see the bullhead. And because they said, it's not just the black and white of the just seeing the movement. It's the story behind the watch. And you know what? If any watch has a story, goodness gracious, this one's got a heck of a story. I've got one on my bench now that it's got an amazing story as well. We aren't filming that one just because it's a blue pogue, but because we've had 100 of them on the channel, but it's just just personal history with the owner. These watches mean so much to them, and it's just quite something. And so, um, I really appreciate everyone who said to do it, because it kind of gave me a bit of less hesitation about, investing all the hours and days putting the video together, even after the watch is done. If people want to see it, I'm happy to do it. And just about everyone said they did. So, we're here, thankfully, because this one took forever to do, but, thank you again. We're using some plastic to, just to make sure that little C-clip doesn't go flying off, because, that can happen from time to time. At least it's happened to me. So, I'm just better safe than sorry at this point, and we'll go ahead and cover it with plastic. Thankfully, it's from the factory and it's still in the correct orientation. The rounded side is down, which allows me to get a small, thin screwdriver underneath it. But take a look there, see where MAR on because the Spanish English day wheel. I wonder what day this thing was on when that watch was stored in a drawer for 35 years. Same with the one. You can tell where that was, but it comes off easily enough. And obviously we're going to clean both those wheels thoroughly. But that's one way to tell if a watch with a date window, if it's sat for decades, especially exposed to the elements, you can tell what day it stopped on. Moving on, disassembling the dial side of the movement, we have two cover plates, and this secondary cover plate also has the jumper spring for the day wheel integrated into it. And use some Rodico to remove our jumper spring for the date wheel. And now, once all that's out of the way, we can just gently remove that wheel. And so I'm gripping way up on the tweezers in there, so I'm not touching that wheel with the tips of my tweezers and potentially marking it. So, little history on this movement. If you're unaware, I think I've went over it in other videos, but this is a 6138B specifically. The 6138 movement, I believe the first one, they were made from 1970 to 79. The 6138B, the A came out in 70, the B came out in 71, and the 6138 is the dual register. The 6139 is the single register, like in the Pogues. And the dual register actually was the first one to come out. So this B movement, this watch dates to 76. Obviously, it should have a B movement in there, which is correct. Real quick, I fumble a little bit with my tweezers. Some of these screws in this watch, they declared war on me when we started this watch. I lost a few battles, but we eventually ended the war. But go ahead and remove this cover plate. Hour wheel comes along with it. Our intermediate wheel for the calendar works, and our minute wheel can come out. Now we can use our cannon pinion puller, and there's just a little collet in there that grabs that, and just the whole intent of that purpose, or that tool, its sole purpose is to lift that wheel straight up. But there we can take a look at our cannon pinion, and zooming in closely, take a look at this center wheel and all that dried Seiko S4 grease that's in there. And that could be a reason, I would guess, that wheel was so difficult to check and shake on, is because it did not want to move. And likely that's where most of the friction that caused that bounce to come to a dead stop was likely due to this. Not just that, but that's a major part of it. Taking a look here, we can see here, this is one of the pieces that had this major formation of an oxide layer on top of the part. And so this is not a stainless steel alloy that they're using. So exposed to the elements, even in a drawer. And he said even his house was flooded at one point. Real quick, you can see that eccentric screw is oriented into the correct position. This other eccentric for the flyback lever is normally, we'll go ahead and I'll draw an arrow up here. Normally you want it pointing towards the pusher, but this one's not. But also this watch is unserviced. So normally if I was servicing a watch, and yeah, it should kind of point there, I would adjust that. But I decided at the time, I was like, I'm not going to say I'm smarter than Seiko by any means. So we'll leave it alone at first to see it. But all that eccentric is going to do is adjust the amount of engagement that flyback lever has with the hammer. And then it's going to go on the secondary braking lever and all that. It's going to adjust how much engagement it has with that. And it'll adjust how much the hammer engages with that our recording wheel, and that stopping lever, that brake that actually moves out of the way as you push the button. If it needs to be adjusted, we can, but that's where you do it, is that second eccentric post we looked at. But yeah, that oxide layer is just, that is all over that part. This wheel here is the our recording wheel. And we have a tension spring right here that we will gently pull back. And so again, that's not a screw that goes around. That is an eccentric post. So it can be easily mistaken for a screw, but if you try to unscrew it, it does move by design, but it doesn't move like a screw does. It takes a lot of force to move those. So the people will quickly realize it's not a regular screw. Go ahead and pull the last of those two parts out. That little lever, when the chronograph is stopped, that little lever presses against the side teeth of that hour recording wheel and keeps it from moving, because that wheel is driven directly by the mainspring barrel, which is always turning. And there's just a little spring and clutch assembly on the underside of the barrel. So it'll overpower that. But yeah, you saw me, that little arrow there was pointing to that part. That part kind of, I'm guessing because of the accident, it was kind of out of place a little bit. So as I removed that one plate, that part just popped straight up and popped all the parts out of the way. Not a huge thing. Our setting lever spring also has a pretty good layer of oxide that formed on that. And that is a precursor to rust. But, this thing did sat in a drawer. If it had been exposed outside to, additional moisture and all that, this thing could have potentially been rusted all the way through. So it's probably a good thing that Jeff just kept this thing in a drawer for 35 years, because it could have been so much worse. Pulling out our yoke. Our setting lever. And our winding pinion and sliding clutch. Just the gunk in there is just going to hold them in there, but that didn't work out like I planned. Hang on. There we go. There's our winding pinion and sliding clutch. So before we flip this back over, I'm just going to take this opportunity now to go ahead and remove the balance jewel from this dial side of the movement. So that is called a dia shock spring when it's on the balance. There is also dia fix. When you see, and there's different, 2 or 3 different designs of dia fix, just depending up over the years as they, produce different ones. Dia shocks are generally much easier than dia fix springs. But we can finish up here. Since the cane and pinion is removed, the center wheel can come out. So we'll go ahead and remove this bridge plate. Got a fair amount of gunk on the underside of that jewel. And our center wheel. There we go. So one of the things we'll go through it in the video. I put the balance back in real quick just to remove that upper jewel. So I posted about it on Patreon, and one of the things I said, I wanted, if we're going to do this video and it's going to be the same movement that was in the last video, but what can we do that's, a different experience outside of whatever unique problems this watch may have? And it occurred to me that at least for this channel, I made a comment recently where I said, that the pre-cleaning process is for me, and then that footage is sped up slightly, but that screw was that loose. I didn't pre-loosen that. That's how loose that stud screw was. And as we disassemble the balance, I said on a previous video that the cleaning process for me, the more thorough and OCD I become with it, and the more work I put into it, it has become a longer and longer and longer process for me. But the better results I see on the finished watch, there's a direct correlation to that. And I said in the video that usually takes me longer to do the cleaning process than it does to actually, assemble and disassemble the watch. And I think that kind of surprised a lot of people. I mean, I've received a few people left comments on. I've received a lot of messages about that, inquiring about it. And so we said, you know what? I just kind of decided on this one. Let's go ahead and it was honestly after I filmed it. So, but I wanted to include a lot of that footage that generally doesn't really get shown because it's not the meat and potatoes of the video. It's not how does the movement get taken apart? How does it go back together? It's about just what the cleaning process, at least mine, looks like. And, and on this watch, it was a good candidate for it because we have a lot of things that a normal watch, it's either been serviced regularly, or if it has sat for, 35 years after being worn for 14, it hasn't sat all that time with, completely exposed to the elements. At least, it had a crown in it or something. So, the cleaning on this one was quite extreme. Real quick, this is an original Seiko mainspring. We can see the bridle is the actual top section of it. The regular mainspring is the bottom. You can see that bridle is 2 times as thick at least. Seiko will do that. So real quick, we're going to start off by taking a look at the status of these jewels. What do they look like before we begin? So what we're going to see here, I got quite a bit of footage in here of just the cleaning and inspection process and what that entails. And my hope is that it will provide some context as to the amount of work that actually goes into, at least when I'm doing them for folks. This isn't an advertisement of services or anything. It's just this is what I do when I work on watches. And, but I've always thought that this wasn't the most exciting thing. So I've left a lot of it out. And so I'm speeding up a bunch of this footage, and, I'm not going to show every single piece, but I will show a lot of it. And so, right now we're beginning just with some pegwood, and certain parts are in better shape than others. But the whole goal of this right now is not to clean the stuff off of it. It's to break it loose. So it may not, a lot of times after we peg it, it's not going to look as good. It's going to look worse than it did before we started. But the point of it is to get all that broken stuff, the stuff that's really caked on there, kind of broken up. So that way, when we do pre-clean it, it's going to come off. So when I got to the chronograph bridge here, I started seeing some pegwood kind of build up in the jewel. And so looking at this a bit more closely, we'll clean it off. Here's another remnant of the motorcycle crash. We have a broken upper chronograph wheel jewel, fourth wheel jewel. So that is the upper jewel that runs that chronograph wheel. And if we have put a backlight behind it, you can see that mark going all the way across. So we are going to have to address that. Moving on, there is just a significant amount of just film over everything. I will admit that's rather satisfying seeing that piece come off, but just take a look at, when we peg this out, and just, it takes a lot of elbow grease. See how tough that stuff is to come off? And I have to go over the whole watch like this, just kind of breaking this surface film of just, 3.5 decades of sitting exposed off of there. And this isn't even addressing the oxide layer on a lot of these parts. Just methodically working through them. This here was just a little film test. I didn't know if this backlight would really work in filming, but I don't know. I just figured I'd try it. Just going to poke this through and just kind of clean up. Sometimes pegwood will leave, little bits of stuff inside the holes of the jewels, and pre-cleaning usually addresses that. But just do that under the microscope. It gives me a really good look. But after we peg this and just try to break up a lot of this loose grease, you can see that post there, which again is not a screw, but that does have, a rusted head on that. So we will need to address that, because that will do nothing but just get worse. So we'll zoom in here. I've got a couple different fiberglass pin brushes. This one here, the yellow head on it, the bristles that are in this one are much larger and this firmer, stiffer. So it's a bit more of an aggressive fiberglass pin. I have another one that's a red one. The bristles are very thin. They flex a lot more, so it's a bit softer. But that can be an effective tool to remove surface rust. But we are left with just a very scratched head. Now, any pitting is still going to be there. But what I'm attempting to do is, I've got a hard felt wheel on this rotary tool. Again, that's not a screw I can remove and just polish the head of it like a screw. So I'm just trying to clean up the head of that as best I can, just with a hard felt wheel. And we have some green Dialux on there. Rather low RPMs. I'm being very gentle and very light and just kind of going through it. And then I think it actually cleans it up pretty darn well. Now it's going to leave just this film of Dialux. Is very stubborn to remove. It comes off in cleaning, but Rodico takes care of some of it. I actually bring out some pegwood and I try to see if that'll come off with pegwood. I just realized, you know what? Just when we put it in naphtha, the naphtha will eat up that Dialux and it'll be fine. So moving on, our flyback lever for our recording mechanism. We have a fair amount of gunk on this thing. So my pegwood, I kind of shape one end to a point and the other end like a spade or like a screwdriver. But it looks like we have some rust built up here as well. So I'll go ahead and I use my larger, softer brush at first, if I remember correctly. Yes. Bristles on that, you can see a lot. Well, it's moving pretty fast. It's kind of hard to see. We'll switch to a bit more aggressive one. And it has pitted that a little bit, but we do get all that rust out. And so that part is still very, very much usable. But we just need to make sure that all that rust gets removed. Then I'm going to go ahead and after this is the last time I used the felt wheel. I eventually remembered I had something that would work a lot better than this felt wheel that I'll use in all the parts moving forward. But we'll go ahead and remove the small layer of the oxide layer that was on this and then go over that pitted part as well and just kind of buff all that out the best we can. But actually, we got a pretty darn good result just with that felt wheel. You can take a look at this thing, and after cleaning, it'll even be even better. But that thing's nice and shiny and looking good. So our setting lever spring was one of the more heavily, parts with the heaviest oxide layer on it. So I finally, I want to kind of show you here. When you try to pegwood this doesn't come off like dirt and gunk. It will, all the elbow grease in the world is not going to be enough to actually remove that oxide layer, as you see here. So if left unchecked and the watch is not sealed, this will eventually rust. But since it was in a rather, at least consistently controlled environment, even though exposed, it's not as nearly as bad as what it would be. So what we're using here is a radial bristle disc. This model specifically is 3M. I find them to be the best ones. These are the different color codes coordinate to different grits. I think if I remember right, the pink is pumice, but it's about 600 to 800 grit. I'm using rather low RPM, but they can get into the microns. But these are already kind of pre-impregnated with the abrasive. You don't put any compound on these. But these are flexible. The heads can bend so you can get into nooks and crannies with them, and it does a fantastic job of cleaning these parts up. I bought mine in a kit a while back. I remember they weren't cheap, but they do work well. After we finish with that radial bristle disc, you can see it does a really nice job of removing that surface layer of oxidation that's on these parts. So I figured I'd try to get a little bit fancy and hold them. Another part, this is one of our coupling levers. And on the underside of it, we can see we have a pretty good amount of surface oxidation. But quickly learned in this process that it is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to hold it in the focus range of the camera. It's totally focused for me through the eyepiece of the microscope, but the camera has it's not the greatest camera in the world, folks, but it's got a very limited focus range. So not everything is in focus. One more. And here you can, I do the kind of just get the tip of it a little bit. Now you can kind of see, we'll pull the thing away and you can see the difference that wheel makes. It does a fantastic job. Makes quick work of that. And so definitely worth the part. But I did go through 2 of these discs because they do wear. And went through 2 of these discs just going over the parts in this watch. And again, those discs are not cheap. Those 3M discs are not cheap, but I find those to be far and away worth the cost. But moving on, we're going to go ahead and just kind of use a pin polisher. The green grit, they call those extra fine grit. If you're interested in kind of learning what some of these tools are, I'm not sure if I have the radial bristle discs on there, but I can add them if someone wants. But in the description of each video on the channel, and I realized I hadn't cleaned the pinion yet, so I did that, and we'll go ahead and retouch up that the top pivot. And right here, the video's sped up, but I'm being extra careful and especially careful with that chronograph wheel with that pivot. It looked like a much more aggressive action because it was sped up, but being very gentle. And again, my very poor attempt at trying to keep this in focus while zoomed in ridiculously small, trying to just make sure that the faces of the jewels on the pallet fork are there. And you can see how much that pallet fork's moving in my tweezers. I am not gripping it hard. Super, super gentle. We're just sped up. One quick thing, the minute recording wheel, those do have a tend to separate off there, but that thing's in real good shape, so that is good to see. But we'll go ahead and begin pre-cleaning now. But folks, if you're interested in any of the tools that I use, in the description of this video and any others for the past 12, 16 months, there'll be a link to a Google document. It's a free document, but there's notes on 95% of all the tools I use, where I got them, notes about which tools, and even the ones I bought that, in my opinion, I kind of wasted my money on because there's better options and stuff I've learned over the years. Any Amazon links or affiliate links, do not feel obligated to use them. A lot of stuff on there is not Amazon, but that's just where I got it. But there's just a lot of notes. It's free information. Anyone can see the document. It's just a Google document, a Google spreadsheet. Feel free to take a look at it. I hope a lot of people have said that the notes they found helpful, and I'm glad they did. So that's there if you'd like to take a look at it. Moving on, we pre-cleaned everything with naphtha, and now we want to do the barrel arbor jewel upgrade. So this jewel here, you can see that oil sink that's kind of machined into that jewel. I source these from two different suppliers, one mainly, but it does take a while to get. The other one is in the US, the other one's not. I like the one, this one here, the one I like the most. They've got oil sinks on both sides, and so that this particular jewel could be mounted in either orientation. There's a radius cut on the outside of the jewel tool to help in inserting it to make it easier. The other one's not, and so you just have to make sure you install it in the right direction, but both do work. You can see there, we're going to go ahead and do this chronograph jewel and go ahead and pop this out. Now these jewels there's a flat side and a side with an oil sink. So this one here, we do have to make sure that the flat side goes towards the wheel and the oil sink goes towards the top where you would oil it, because when you oil it, that oil sink acts as an oil sinking. But just taking a look at this thing real close, we're looking at the underside of the jewel where it engages with the wheel. And that chip, although, that wheel would still function, but we do need to replace that. So we just talked about putting the jewels in the correct orientation. And since I'm open and honest about the mistakes I make, I'm doing one right here, and I'm actually putting the jewel in backwards. I quickly realize it and then flip it around and put it in correctly before we press the jewel in. But, the reason those jewels break like that is because even though they're harder than the steel pivot, they're very brittle. So not a surprise to see it break. And you notice we didn't do a lower barrel arbor jewel because in the 6138s, that lower barrel arbor goes through the main plate into the chronograph cover plate on the underside, and that is already jeweled. So we don't have to do that. We only replace one jewel on the 6138 when we do the barrel arbor upgrades. A couple of the wheels did need to be straightened. So what you're seeing now is just footage after that. This is a truing caliper. This particular one is a lyre style truing caliper. And so we got the wheels pretty straight. Pretty pleased with it. We'll go ahead and switch over to the balance here. I didn't bother taking the hairspring off. Don't freak out when I spin it. It's actually not going to hurt the hairspring. But there is the tiniest amount of wobble in there, but I didn't want to get too aggressive with it, but definitely an improvement over where it was before. So I'm very pleased with that. Hairspring looks nice and straight. So all good there. After we installed our jewels, I'm checking in shake, and I've made some adjustments. So, this video would be 2.5 hours long. Otherwise, if I left all that in there, but we check in shake, press the jewel up or down as needed. And here's our end results, achieving the in shake we want on each wheel. Barrel looked good. The center wheel looked good. Put the rest of the wheels in and put our main plate or our bridge plate on. Obviously, we didn't touch the escape wheel, so that end shake is exactly like it was before. Same with the third wheel, looking good. but we can't test our chronograph wheel until we put our bridge on, our chronograph bridge. So we do that. And I did make an adjustment to this jewel as well. Now we have the end shake where I like it. And also you can kind of tell there that where the barrel engages with the center wheel, that's in a much better running position now as well. But the whole wheel train is running very smooth. Very pleased with it. So I think we can move on. All that work has been done. So we disassemble everything back down to the individual components. And now we can go ahead and load up the parts. And right now, while I'll do this, I'll just, a couple of you have been kind of following my fake cat that I don't actually have, but I blame for every video is really lazy and doesn't contribute to anything. So if you would please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. 74% of you, our viewers, are not subscribed. So it's on you. But seriously though, if you do enjoy the content, I really would appreciate it. It helps the channel reach more viewers. And I just like to say thank you so much. So if you wouldn't mind, hit the like and subscribe, leave a comment. I do read everyone, and thank you so much. Got everything loaded up, and we'll go ahead and put it in our cleaning machine. This Elma cleaning machine, I am admittedly very spoiled to have. I got a great deal on it. It's not, and this is a cheap version of a more expensive automated machine I'd think I'd love to have, but I don't have. But works really well. Quick shout out to the patron members of this channel. Thank you so much. Without your support, this channel is not sustainable. I appreciate every single one of you. And thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart for supporting the channel. A lot of free members too. There's a couple hundred free members now. And most of the content I post there is viewable to everyone. If you're able to support the channel by other means, it means the world to me. But even if you just take the time to go over there and sign up for a free account, you get to see what we're working on before it gets posted. I put a lot of updates on there, and I just appreciate every one of y'all that are over there. So thank you. While the cleaning machine's running is usually when I take apart the case. Here you can see this thing. It, well, I've seen worse. Because taking in mind, this watch is 50 years old and never been serviced, but it's also sat in a drawer for 35 of those 50 years, or 49 years. So there's about 14 years of wear and dirt accumulated in this watch. So it's not as bad as you would, as it could be. Our crystal gasket is a Viton crystal gasket. And as I anticipated, it's never come off. So it's in perfect reusable shape. We'll clean that up with some IPA, and that'll clean it perfect. And that thing is just as supple now as the day it was new. So we can absolutely reuse that one. That's the only gasket we reuse in these watches. As long as they're not physically damaged, they can be reused. They're super resistant to heat and chemicals and all that. But mine, from what I've read, I mean, they're not extremely cost effective to make for watch companies. So, Seiko stopped making them years ago. But cleaning up this case, getting it ready for ultrasonic, same process as the movement. We're trying to just break up the grime and grit and junk that's in there. And so this watch being exposed, I got a little layer of just film all over everything too. Some of the more stubborn components, I'm using some old brass tweezers that I have relegated to this duty. And that doesn't mar the steel case, but it'll break up a lot of the really stubborn stuff that the pegwood has a difficult time with. So if you have a pair of, especially just number 7 style brass tweezers, that you don't mind just relegating to that task, because it's not worth the effort to reshape them every time you do it to then use them on a watch, but they'll do a good job of that. Inside that crown tube is just, just a ton of junk, but we'll go ahead and try to loosen that up. And just trying to get all that stuff inside there where the pusher tubes go. Or resharpen my pegwood here and give this one another attempt. We're just trying to clean that up and break up all that loose stuff and let the ultrasonic, let it do the fine detail work. On our bezel, you can see here just this mass of a film of just gunk. I wish I had a better adjective that was more eloquent than gunk, but it's an appropriate term because that's what this is. But it's kind of grimy and almost, it smears rather than just coming off, but it's all got to come off. So that's where that flat shape of that does a really good job on the flats of that. The flat shape I put on the pegwood does a really good job of just kind of scraping that. And you can see as we get to the sides of that side of that that actually bezel, you can see the color come back. The buckle on this bracelet was just heavily filled with just all kinds of grossness. And I think I even said a few adjectives that's why we're leaving the audio out on this part. But yeah, that was pretty gross. But that means you love the watch and wore it a bunch. But Jeff, you can take a look at your watch now. None of that nonsense is in that buckle now. We got it all cleaned up. Just took a little bit of elbow grease and time, and then ultrasonic will get all the little fine details out of there. But this pegwood, again, just allows it to do a better job when we put it in the solution. But we'll get all that cleaned up and finalized. We can take all of our case parts and move them over to the ultrasonic and see what it has in store for us today. That was a pretty good song this time. So next, in order to provide some different footage than what we've normally shown, so what we're doing here is I'm reloading my oils. And so what we're doing, I'm using some thin tweezers and I'm just kind of dipping them in the lubricant. Right here we have 90-10, and I'm just kind of letting gravity do the thing, and we'll go ahead and dump that in there. Close the lid. I just make these little labels. This here is HP 1300. The red, it comes clear by default. You can get a red colored version that will just allow you to see where you're placing the oil a bit better. We'll kind of do our thing. A little bit thicker oil so it doesn't come off as fast. And that's more than a few watches worth right there. And these oils, like it, I try to put as little as possible, and I still put too much in there, but still, for me, you know, one of these tubes of lubricant lasts quite a long time, although this lubricant is not cheap. Here's our blue grease. We'll go ahead and get that in there, and then I like to stir it up and just kind of even out the mixture so that it's not really clumpy. This here is our escapement lubrication. Some Mobius 941. And that's that's 50 watches worth right there. I mean, I could do 1,000 watches out of that little tube, but I mean, that's so, I always, I never empty those pots. I always clean out the lubricant and then reload fresh lubricant when I change it out, because I never use what's in the pots before I need to apply new lubricant. But, our balance and pallet fork and stuff will going into one dip. So we're just going to clean those up. And real quick on that oiler, or on that oil stand, you know, that's one of the things. So if any of you watching who've worked on watches probably saw that oil stand and like, oh man, he bought that thing. Like, I'll be the first to say it. Like, that is a stupid expensive little 4-pot oil stand. I bought some less expensive ones when I started out, and I found a few things annoying about them. That Bergeon one, and everything with Bergeon costs a lot. Just having that name on a product, I mean, allows them, they charge a premium. And for the most part, their products are really well made. I cannot sit here and tell you that see that oil ring in the center of that jewel is right where we want it to be. But I cannot sit here and in all honesty say that the cost of that is worth it. But I will say it is far and away the nicest one I've ever tried. Just for some context, that oil pot from Bergeon costs in the neighborhood of $200 for the 4 little pots and the little stand to hold that lubrication. And, you know, I when I bought it at the time, I was frustrated because I had the other one. I've had a bunch of other ones, and they kept moving around on the bench, and they were just cheap. And some of the tools I have are cheap tools, and they work perfect. And I've never found a need to replace it. And that was really bugging me. And then out of frustration one evening, I just ordered it. I'm like, whatever, fine. And I spent $200 on it. But I will say, it is nice. Is it $200 nice for an oil pot? Well, they got my money out of the deal, and I'm sure some others, so I can't sit here and tell you that it's worth it, but they are nice. So moving on. Got the balance back in. I'm just setting the hairspring stud height where we want it to be. And if you take a look at the stud, as we're going to close the screw, that stud's going to move. And it's, it's a trial and error. It's where it ends up that matters. So it kind of goes down at first and kind of comes back up, and that minute difference that will affect the orientation of that spring. But sometimes you fiddle with it for a while. Sometimes you nail it on the first go. But once we get it tightened down, we just check both sides of that spring and everything's looking flat. And then I'm also looking at that impulse jewel where it's in line with the pallet fork and the escape wheel jewels. And although it's really, really close, it looks a hair off. So we're just going to make a tiny adjustment. That's way too much. Go back a little bit. And it's almost dead on where it was before. But to my eye, and through there, I could tell it was slightly better. But that's just, we're just trying to minimize bead error as best we can before, we put the watch together. In shake on the balance. That's about at the limit of what I like to see. But we'll go with it. It's not bad. Next up is assembling the barrel. So we are applying some braking grease. I'm just going to show one of the four. I put this around the barrel in 4 different spots. And then I, for some reason, did not hit record on the camera when I installed the mainspring. So we did put in a brand new mainspring in here. We put the arbor on. I lubricated the bottom post, then realized, well, I didn't hit record on any of that. So you saw us, we start with lubricating the top post, but all that obviously work did get done. We'll put the cap on. And what we want to do is just make sure that the cap, that the lid is sitting down inset into the mainspring barrel all the way around. And that's what I'm checking for right there. But everything's looking good. Now we can begin. I'm just going to start with the center wheel because I want to install the dial side of this watch first. And you can install the timekeeping side, the watchmaker side first if you want. I like doing the dial side first when I do 6138s, but I've done videos showing both ways. But in order to put the cannon pinion in, the cannon pinion attaches to the center wheel. So the first thing we have to do is install our center wheel in bridge. So we got the lubrication point set. We can drop our bridge plate on. There we go. And tighten this thing up. Starting off on the dial side of the movement, we're going to start out with our keyless works. So here you can see we have a new stem and crown, which is correct for this watch. Applying some of our blue heavier grease to a few different points along this stem, and we can go ahead and put this in. So one of the challenges of installing the dial side of the watch first is that without any components, without the main bridge and everything on the back side of the watch, there's nothing really to capture the winding pinion and the sliding clutch. So we have to kind of do a little bit of a balancing act here to get these in. So we pre-lubricated our stem and we pre-lubricated our winding pinion right there. And we'll just kind of do a little dance and hold that in place. And now we can apply some more of that heavy grease on the sliding clutch. And once again, just kind of holding the stem in place, we can get that set into place. And now we can rotate this around and get everything where it needs to be. Okay. Lubricating the post for the setting lever. We can also lubricate the hole in the main plate. Either way works just fine. And when we just set this down, we want to make sure there's a little nub on the underside of that setting lever that goes into that little groove in the stem. And now we can go ahead and apply some more heavy grease to a few more points. The points we're doing right here is where the yoke is going to engage with the setting lever. The day-date corrector mechanism, or the quick set corrector mechanism, is going to ride on the back side of that setting lever, and the little post there for the setting lever spring. And then in here inside the sliding clutch where the yoke is going to run. Now we can switch up our lubrication to HP 1300 and lubricate the post for our little boomerang, which is not the name of the part, but that's what I call it, and our yoke. So the boomerang goes in place. we can drop our yoke into place, making sure that it is in the correct orientation. It's easy to put that backwards or flipped 180 degrees. And then a spot of grease on the tip of that where the yoke spring is going to ride. And someone asked me, they said, well, how come you don't grease the other side where it connects with the boomerang? Because it would make sense. And absolutely correct. Generally, the manual actually doesn't show that as a lubrication point. It would make total sense and it wouldn't hurt anything if it did. But from the factory, that wasn't a lubrication point for whatever reason. But it makes complete sense that it would be. But that's why I didn't, is because it's just not there. But I have before. A little bit more grease where the setting lever spring is going to put downward pressure on the setting lever. And you can see the marks on the setting lever where over time, it's kind of marked that up. So it's just, there's always constant pressure on that. So we're screwing this down, but not all the way. Just kind of getting the screws set, but a little bit of a gap. And I'm being very generous with the grease here on the setting lever, or the setting lever spring rather, where the setting lever is going to engage. And then we'll clean up that grease later down the road. But I want a fair amount of lubrication there before we first start moving these parts and engaging them together. Now we can pull that spring into place. Good deal. More HP 1300 for that quick set mechanism. And I'm just using a little bit of 9010 right here to 3 different points on this, 2 on one side, 1 on the other, and just a tiny bit of 9010 there for those gears. And now we need to pull that yoke spring back. That's what that hole in that setting lever spring is for. And we can set this into place, but making sure that I have my setting lever oriented where that 90-degree bend at the end of that part that goes down is on the outside edge of that setting lever, because that's where it needs to ride. If you're doing one of these for the first time or something, you're having a really difficult time putting that part in, most of the time it's going to be because the setting lever is not in the right spot to give clearance for that quick set mechanism to go on. Cover plate can go on, and now I'm just going to go ahead and tighten up these setting lever spring screws. And so, while we're doing this, this is, similar to the work we did in the last video, and the rest of the keyless works on this movement is something, if you're a regular viewer to the channel, you've likely seen already. But Jeff was kind of telling me about this watch, and I always love it hearing, the stories people have with them. And so he was telling me, Jeff bought this watch new. So he was a private, just out of basic. And he was at a PX. He's in the Marines. He went to kind of the base store, the post exchange. And, these Seiko watches were very, they a lot of them stocked these watches. A friend of mine named Dennis, long before the channel existed, he bought his Bullhead. The only watch he's ever owned was a beautiful single owner, black and blue Bullhead, the other color variant aside from this one. And I had the honor of doing that one. But he had the same story, minus the motorcycle accident. But he had bought that watch and worn it for decades. But so Jeff bought this watch, and he told me, he said, Adam, he's like, I was a private, so I had to save up a couple paychecks, but he bought this watch at the PX store and wore it while he was during his service. So I thought that was pretty funny. He made the point to tell me, he's like, I had to save up a few paychecks to get that, but he got this watch. So I just thought that was funny, a funny little anecdote he shared about this. And then in that motorcycle accident, it's amazing that, he didn't go into too much detail about the accident. But just the fact that happened 35 years ago, and I was speaking with him over the phone about this watch, and just he was talking to me about it as just a testament to just good fortune, and that he was able to survive that, because I had a family member was in a motorcycle accident years ago, and it was rough, but it's a thing. So I'm glad Jeff survived it, and he seems to be well today. I don't know what injuries he sustained from it. I didn't inquire about that, but it was more of the conversations were about the watch and not him. But this watch definitely has a lot of personal meaning to him. I mean, he bought it, you know, fresh into the service out of basic, wore it, it was on his wrist that fateful day when he had his accident. And the fact that he kept it for 35 years in a drawer. And it was just, I mean, didn't want to get rid of it. So I think it's just amazing. And this, I don't know if there's a prize that could be offered that would, equal the value that the sentimental value in the history that he has with this specific watch. And so, thank you again, Jeff, for the opportunity to work on it. Thank you for your patience, and just kind of allowing me to work through my list of watches. And I've got a lot of folks on the list. I had to create a waiting list of sorts just due to the amount of requests, and I've temporarily had to suspend taking in new requests until I can shorten the amount of people that are on that list. And so at one point it was over 20 watches deep. And so the wait list just became kind of ridiculous. And I just hated having to tell people, oh, it'll be 8 months, 9 months before I can get to it. And I just don't like telling people that. So for the time being, I've had to suspend accepting new watches in, just because it's unfair to ask people to wait 8 or 9 months. And and it just, so it less stress on me, because again, this is not my day job. I work on these outside of every other responsibility that I have, work and home and everything else. So the wait list, I appreciate everyone's enthusiasm and contacting me on the channel. And I didn't anticipate the volume of responses I got when I started doing this kind of work for folks, but I'm honored that you reached out. And so, but I'll probably make a post somewhere once I get the list caught up. But anyone who I have talked about, I've got you down in the order. And so I'm working on the watches in the order of the request when it was first received. And so, like we said, that 6 month wait time ish is pretty accurate. And so that's kind of where we're at. But I'm trying my best to get through them at a decent pace. But I hope this video will also kind of provide some context as to why it takes so long, at least for me, to kind of get through each individual watch. Just because, again, just so folks are aware, I don't bring in the watches until I'm ready to work on them. Not only for liability purposes, but just for comfort level with the person who owns the watch. They don't want to send to someone if they've never met, and then they're like, well, he's going to have it for 6 months before he even works on it. I didn't want to operate like that. So again, I never bring in a watch until we're ready to work on it. And, they generally within a few days of getting it, they start getting feedback, about the process. So that's why it takes so long to get them in. But I work through them very slowly and methodically. And for those of you that are on the wait list, I've got you down. But I had to stop taking in additional requests until I can work through the pending ones, just because the wait times were getting to a point where I just thought it was almost ridiculous the amount of time I was telling people they would have to wait. So that's why. So a bit off topic, but for those handful of you who may watch this video who I have talked to about your watches, who've reached out, that's where we're at. So we'll keep working on the list until I get it down to, a few or something, or get caught up or whatever it may be, but then we'll open it back up to more requests. But not all of them are going to be filmed, and quite honestly, most of them aren't filmed. And a lot of it is because of things like this, where most of the watches people reach out to me for are Seikos, for obvious reasons. I totally get it. It's kind of my thing. And I feel like we produce some pretty good results, but it is a very long and methodical process. But again, I just don't want to overload the channel with the same watch over and over. But the story is also a major part of that, which is, again, why we have this bullhead on here, just because the story was just so remarkable. And I didn't know what to expect when we first got the watch in. What's it going to look like? 35 years of sitting in a drawer without a crown, plus a motorcycle accident. So, wow, that's got to be on film. Well, I don't know what we're going to get. So anyways, sorry, me being long-winded. We'll kind of get back to that, but you know what, folks, please indulge me. I know you're half the people, I get comments all the time. Adam, you ramble. I got to turn the volume off or turn the video off. Well, okay. Well, if you turn the volume off, my feelings aren't as hurt because I don't like the sound of my own voice either. But turn the video off, I don't know what to tell you. So that's just, I do what I do. But I briefly mentioned something on the previous video, and I'm going to follow up on it because I've had a few people ask. So if you're in the know, if you know, you know. But I have not heard from Steve yet. So I won't go into all the details, but I did make a mention of it briefly. But for those of you who are curious, haven't heard from Steve yet. And I actually had lunch with him and a few friends on Thursday of last week. I intentionally didn't bring it up just to see if he did. Haven't heard from him yet. So we'll see what happens. Okay, back to the video. So we got our wheel train in, got our bridge on, and now we're just going to do the little tapping trick. Let me rotate this around. And the purpose of this is, I'm not holding on to the movement. I'm just kind of letting it bounce against my fingers, but we're trying to vibrate it and just get all of those pivots to find their jewels. So once we do that, very, very, very light pressure on the bridge plate, and we'll just rotate the barrel. And all I'm really looking at is the escape wheel, because if that escape wheel turns freely, everything else prior to it would be too. But it's also not the end of the world if it doesn't turn, because obviously our upper pivot for the chronograph wheel is not yet inset into a jewel. So it's not going to turn as freely as it would with that chronograph bridge actually on there. But everything did spin, and these 61, 38s, and 39s are great. The little tapping trip just works fantastic with these. Some other movements, and especially some other, a lot of Swiss movements, that's not always the case. Especially, the more vintage movements you get, especially ones that have locating pins for the bridge plates, the tapping trick doesn't work. But when you can use it, boy, it's a handy trick. So moving on, trying to put our ratchet wheel in place and get it keyed into that square hole, but it's not sitting down all the way. I need to just adjust my little click spring. But there we go. We can screw that down, and we need to just use a little plastic tool just to hold the ratchet wheel ever so steady and just snug that screw. Moving on to our column wheel or pillar wheel, whatever term you want to use. So that pillar wheel rotates around a bushing. So we'll get that set into place. And just kind of make sure it's flat all the way down. And a little bit more HP 1300 on the outside of that bushing. And I'm going to go ahead and pre-lubricate the end of this spring here with just some grease. It's easier to do it now than it is when that wheel is on, but I've done it both ways. So now we'll just pull that spring back. That's a very strong spring. We just need the clearance to go ahead and put our column wheel or pillar wheel into place. And sometimes the flyback lever, that hammer lever can be in the way. So adjust that if necessary. So we'll get that screw tightened down. And actually, in case you're curious, that column wheel screw that we just did, and while we lubricate all the different points along that column wheel and everything that interacts with it, that screw for the column wheel is the exact same screw on these movements as the first coupling lever. If you're, throw all your parts in a basket while cleaning, there's only two of those screws in the movement, but the column wheel and the first coupling lever screw, where this arrow is pointing right now, those two are the same screws. So there you go. Next up, we need to apply some lubrication to our escape wheel and to our third wheel, because these jewels are going to be covered up by a cover plate that the intermediate minute recording wheel is going to sit and rotate in. So we got those lubricated. We drop our cover plate into place. Just one little screw. And so that bushing that's in there is going to act as the bottom piece where the lower pivot for that intermediate minute recording wheel is going to rotate. And next up, we can move over to our coupling levers. So another challenge of installing the dial side first is that that intermediate braking lever is interacts with this second coupling lever that we're installing now. So in order to get the second coupling lever in place, what we need to do is pull that long post, that braking lever back. So we're going to reach under the coupling lever, pull it back, and then we can take that coupling lever and move it backwards a little bit and then forward where it's going to rest underneath that clutch plate in the chronograph wheel. There we go. And now we can drop our first coupling lever into place, making sure that the column wheel is oriented where that arm on that first lever is going to go between two pillars of that column wheel. And we can get our 2 screws put into place. And although this lubrication point is not in the manual, I like to put a small dab of grease right there where it's going to engage with that post and the second coupling lever. And one more spot right here where those two are going to interact. Next up, we can put our hammer back into place. And move that flyback lever out of the way. There we go. It seats down flush. And now we're just putting a little bit of 90-10 on the striking faces of this hammer. And, ooh, nailed it. Okay. Dang it. Did not nail that one. Screwed that one up right from the start. Touch that up real quick. Okay. So next up, our operating lever spring. So again, just for the sake of me not pinging the spring off into orbit, when I take these off and put these on, I just rest my finger very lightly on the movement. And that way, if I slip or, it kind of comes off the tool, that spring won't go flying. But a good amount of pressure to bend this thing back. So it sits against the second coupling lever, and we'll bend this all the way back around that post that we removed the rust on earlier. There we go. Next up is going to be the hammer spring. It's going to wrap around a couple little posts here. There we go. And you can tell this is one of the differences between the A and the B movement is that this hammer spring it is going to be of a different shape on the A versus the B. So this one is the B series. Go ahead and bring this back. Trying to do it where you can kind of see it, but it goes around that little post there. And once that's set into place, the spring won't go anywhere. Now we can just simply bend this back, and it's going to sit underneath a little lip on that flyback lever. That's going to capture it right there. And a little bit of grease between the flyback lever and the hammer. Next up, our minute recording wheel. So we're lubricating the bottom pivot with just a very small amount of 90-10. And we can drop that into place, making sure that lower extended pivot finds its bearing point, and our intermediate minute recording wheel. And this one here can be a bit of a challenge at times because it's a bit of a balancing act. The only thing holding that wheel up straight is it kind of resting up against the minute recording wheel until you put the bridge plate in place. It's basically impossible to get that wheel in if you don't already have the minute recording wheel on. Drop our chronograph bridge on, and just with very light pressure on top. For me, it's always that intermediate wheel, and I'll just make a quick adjustment, and you see that bridge fall down into place. Once that's done, we can go ahead and get these 3 screws tightened down. And regarding screws, these 3 screws holding down that chronograph bridge are the same screws that hold on the main bridge as well. So all 6 of those combined screws are the same screw. Some grease for the hammer click spring. We'll go ahead and pull this back around the other side of the hammer and set that into place. And that spring, you can adjust the tension on that to adjust the pressure you need to engage that chronograph reset. And there's a direct correlation to that amount of pressure and how much that hammer actually engages with that. So right here, we're checking the spacing, the gap on our coupling levers, and that all looks nice and even. We'll go ahead and just engage the operating lever and our reset. Make sure everything feels good. Then I'll use this opportunity once I work those in a little bit to clean up a bit of our excess grease. Next up, we can move on to lubricating our wheel train, the rest of the jewels. So there's our fourth wheel, even though I made a little bit of a mess of it. And that's our minute recording wheel. It soaked up that 9010. Flipping it over with that chronograph plate on the dial side of the movement, we got to reach down quite far to lubricate the last two jewels for our pallet fork and our third wheel, but we get lubrication in those. Now we can move on to our pallet fork. So we're set our pallet fork into place, getting that bottom pivot in the jewel and making sure that the two jewels on the edge of the pallet fork are between the teeth on the escape wheel. And then we can ever so gently lower our bridge into place, being very, very delicate whenever we're working around the pallet fork, because that's a very delicate part. And those jewels are held in with shellac. But making sure that pivot finds the jewel, the pallet fork moves freely. Good deal. Now we can go ahead and get our two screws here set into place. Now I'm going to go ahead and put some wind into this watch. I'll wind it 5, 6, 7 times, something like that. Not a full wind by any means, but it's just putting some power into the watch, because we want to check the locking depth and the impulse of this pallet fork. And so the other day I got on YouTube and I saw that Alex Hamilton, the watch repair tutorials channel, was a watchmaker by trade, infinitely more qualified than me, but he just did a video of explaining why Seikos historically run at a lower amplitude than their Swiss counterparts. And it's by design, and it's engineered intentionally that way, but he explains stuff far better than I can. If you're ever curious why the amplitudes are different on a lot of Seiko models than their Swiss counterparts, and you can't really compare the two on equal terms by this time grapher readings, highly recommend you watch that video. It's not a long video, but he explains it very well. So that was a really cool video. I don't know the man. I've never met him, but he's a book of knowledge. And so I appreciate when he uploads content like that, because I learn from it. So we got our balance put in, got it to fire up, and it's looking quite nice. Make sure the bridge plate is pressed down, and we can go ahead and get our two screws put into place. Just making sure that they're snug. And just a cursory check. I like the way the hairspring's looking, breathing nice and even. Now I'm just checking the engagement with the chronograph wheel arm and the minute recorder. Everything clears. We'll go ahead and speed this up, rotate it around, and we'll slow it down here and just check this one more time. That's looking really good. So if we zoom in closely, what we're going to want to see is that we'll go ahead and stop the frame here. So what we need is that tooth to engage between 25 and 50% up the face of that arm, which it is. And then clears nicely. So that is perfect. Check the jump. That spring is sitting directly in the middle of two teeth on that jumper spring. And so one thing you'll notice, so this window here is cut out. So if that spring is in this proper spot, you'll see a tooth of that minute recorder wheel directly in the middle of that viewport. So that's exactly what we want to see. So now this watch has been running about 45 minutes or so. So initial time grapher numbers, again, timekeeping is not going to be as consistent yet because this watch has not worn in. But initial results, I'm liking the numbers that we see. Pretty steady rate. Over the coming days, it will kind of even out a little bit more as everything settles in. So final regulation cannot be done until several days after the watch has been running. But these initial numbers just give us an idea of if everything is kind of on point, or if there's a catastrophic error somewhere, we'll see it. But those numbers look really encouraging. So that's great. Moving onwards, we're going to go ahead and finish up the dial side of this movement with our calendar works. So our calendar wheel can go in. We lubricated that base with some HP 1300, but it's not sitting flat. There we go. Next up is our date finger. So that little knob you see there, what was the left side of the screen, is what's going to engage with the date wheel. This one here is our day finger. And then the shouldered screw is actually what holds all this in place. So once we get that screw tightened down, we should have free movement of that day finger. And we do. So that'll work good. 3 different lubrications are going to be used on this date jumper. So we have some HP 1300 on the post, some grease on the edge of the spring where it's going to set against the side of the main plate. We'll go ahead and set this down into place. And pull back and set that spring into place. It does like to kind of sit up when you do it, so just making sure it's pressed down firmly. And then the third different lubrication, we're going to use a little bit of 9010 on the faces of that jumper spring where it's going to interact with the date wheel. There we go. Now we can put our date wheel into place. And we'll pull back on that jumper spring and inset it between 2 teeth on that wheel. And it should set down into place. Just like that. Our cover plate can go on. This cover plate, again, that little arm you see there is the jumper spring for the day wheel. So I'm trying to press down and make sure that there's 2 little posts that it kind of sits and orients against. And I had it all the way down, and I think I bumped it. Yep, bumped it, knocked it loose. So we'll get it back where it needs to go. And the 3 screws hold this in place. There's one more cover plate for the other side that's going to cover a few teeth on that date wheel. And so the screw on this plate is the same screw, and these are countersunk screws. This 1 screw for this part and the 3 for the others are all 4 the same screw. Once we have them in, we just snug them up a lot. And these are the screws, like most of the watches they've ever been worked on, those screws seem to get marred up the most, or the at least first. And so, but these were in great shape. So, and I've seen a few factory watches where the screws, like you could just, I mean, there was a few marks on it from the factory because I think that's a kind of a softer steel, or there's just not a lot of material there because that screw head's so thin because it's a countersunk head. But those were in great shape. So we get our day wheel on. We're oriented where it's kind of the teeth on that day wheel are, in between the teeth for the quick set mechanism. And then we can set our jumper spring into place. Now our clip can go on. Just like that. Okay. Next up, we can finally do some testing on this to make sure that everything is working like it should. So from the inward position, we pull it out 1 spot, and rotating the crown counterclockwise will move the day wheel. Clockwise rotation will do the quick set for the date. Next up, I'm going to pull it out all the way in the time setting mode, and we'll rotate this around until we see the day and date fingers doing their job. And there we go. And that there's 14 teeth on that day finger, so it advances it 2 days at a time. And so that's why the language alternates on that day wheel. But when you're wearing it on your watch, you always see the same language because it advances it 2 spots every time it turns just from normal running. With the quick set, you can adjust it 1 spot at a time, and that's how you change the language on your watch. If you want to go from English to Spanish, or if you have kanji day wheels or Roman day wheels or whatever, they make a bunch of them. But just try to do some cleanup on the dial. So these little spots are underneath the lacquer, or whatever the finish, the top finish that's on that. So those spots are there. We're just going to clean up any, surface dust that's on there, but leave it alone otherwise. Our dial spacer ring goes on, and now we can put our dial back into place. Before this, the spot, one thing I did is I loosen up the dial feet screws before we put the dial on. Now we can go ahead and tighten these back up, and these have an undercut as well. They're basically like countersunk screws. So as you tighten them down, they squeeze onto the dial feet, and that's what holds your dial in place. So we get those two tightened down. Next thing is we need to move over to the hands. So remember how the hands were all kind of bent downwards or looked like they were bent downwards? So on this chronograph seconds hand, you can see that's the degree that it's out of flat. And so looking at it closely, it is on the long skinny side and not the counterweight side of the hand that is bent. So against the edge of the bench block, just being ever so gentle, barely working it, we're going to see if we can kind of get this thing a little bit straighter than what it was. Very, very slowly, because again, this hand is, if I break it, I mean, I can get replacement hands, but it won't be original. So it's getting there. It's not flat yet, but it is getting there. So just ever so gently. Yeah. Looking better. We'll just keep working it a little bit. So on the hour and minute hands, there was just some stuff on there. And again, it's just the fact that it's been exposed to the atmosphere for as long as it has. So we're just going to see what on this wants to be cleaned up, because we are going to keep the original hands. So what you see me using right there is called a magic eraser. A link to that actual thing, I find that really handy. It's just like a Rodico alternative for certain things, but it works great on hands. So does Rodico. But in that document, in the description, that Google document, you can see exactly what those are. So we're not disturbing any of the loom. We're just going on top of the loom and or on top of the hands. The loom is kind of inset into that. So we're not really touching any of the loom, but we're just trying to clean up any of these little spots on these hands that want to come off. But when I need to be extremely delicate, I'll use Rodico. But that magic eraser is, perfectly square side. So it's really nice for going on long flats and stuff. It works well. But taking a look at these hands were not bent, but they were kind of angled on the post. So the action of the crafts, I think, just kind of bent everything a bit downwards. But the hands themselves, the hour and minute hands, were actually pretty straight. So moving on. This little holder here actually supports that bottom jewel. You actually only need this holder when you're doing the minute recording wheel and the chronograph seconds hand, because it supports the jewels from the underside of the movement. So you don't press out the jewels as you press the hands in. We get these in and set down, and those go in place nicely. But this hand here is a replacement because we did not have the original. So we were having to cut the groove into the tube of the hand as we press it on. So this one is significantly more difficult to install because it's the first time. So it's cutting that groove into the chronograph hand. So there's a lot to it. It takes a while to cut because I'm not trying to muscle it. I'm just trying to ever so slightly gradually just kind of get it downwards until it's where I like it. So we finally get that hand where I like it. I'm just checking clearance. Now you can see the hour hand and its clearance to that minute recording hand. And so the clearance is good. Liking that. And that hand's not touching the dial. Now we can put our chronograph seconds hand back into place. So as we install any of the chronograph seconds hand or the minute or hour counting hands, I have the hammer engaged. So I'm pressing that little button on that holder, and I have the hammer resting against those wheels to hold them steady at their home position. So when we put the hands on, it's in the home position. Now we can take a look at the clearance we have on our hands. And so the chronograph seconds hand does need a good amount of clearance to go back, because that swing action, the reset action, is pretty violent. The hand flexes when that happens. So the spacing between the hands needs to account for that. So clearance looked good, nice and even. We're no longer bent downwards. We're not touching any of the indices anymore, which is a good thing. But now we're going to go ahead and give this thing a test and just let it run for a bit. So there we go. Roll over for the minute counter hand. Looks good. We let it run for a while, and this thing ran for about 20 minutes. You can see our hour counter hand is advanced a little bit, just shy of half an hour. And we'll do a quick reset here. And that looked great. Okay, moving on. We can go ahead and assemble our case real quick. These bullhead cases, there's not a lot to them. So we have that inner ring. They may call it a rehaut, if I remember correctly. Could be wrong. Correct me, please, if I am. So We cleaned our crystal gasket in some IPA, and I'm just trying to make sure it's completely in that groove in the case all the way around before we put our new crystal in. So I have a new crystal, and that crystal gasket is an L shape, so we're making sure that is inset into that L, and you saw that crystal set down into that gasket nicely. We're just making sure that that's all the way inset all the way around, and now we can put our bezel on. And it's just you just try to align it as square as you can, and half the time, most of the time, you may have to make an adjustment after you get the dial in, but it's not difficult. On this watch, I actually did not have to adjust that after the fact. It was dead on when I put it on, but again, that's not always the case. But if it is, it's easy to do. But that bezel is actually what holds everything together. So definitely want that on there. Now we need to remove our stem in order to put this watch back in the case. And now we can put these two together finally. And I see that now on video, that one tiny little piece of dust on the top of that crystal right at the 6 o'clock position drove me nuts during editing. It was on the outside of the crystal, mind you, but still drove me crazy. Next up, we can put our tension spring back on the movement ring. So there's a little nub here, and we can just put that into one of the inlets for the pushers and just make sure that spring's on there all the way around. And what I'm doing here is applying a little thin layer of silicone grease to the inner tubes of both pushers and to the stem. And so that's just going to provide a little bit of silicone grease to the gaskets as they're pressed in. I also lightly put a light film silicone grease on those gaskets as well before they go in. But that just makes sure they don't deform or get cut, or they can kind of flex and bend and all that. And they're a little bit supple, especially during when you're installing them, because it compresses that a good amount, especially when you first put them in the tubes. But we press both pushers in, and holding them in place, we can go ahead and get our movement ring back into place. And so when we set that in and it goes down fully, then we can release the pushers and they will be captured by that movement ring. Moving on, we can go ahead and get the rest of our automatic works assembled. And that movement ring, without the case back being on there, and the pusher's actually kind of pulling that movement ring, towards the top view here. That movement ring, don't be alarmed if you're doing one. It likes to raise up in the back, especially if you just bump it. But once that case back is screwed on there and that spring is in there, everything stays perfect. HP 1300 on the post here. Seiko used their own grease on that. HP 1300 also works well. Need to use a liberal amount, but making very, very sure that we're not getting any lubricant on the top of the pivot, because that will rotate right over that chronograph jewel. And that is 2 different lubrications on those 2 different parts. There's 9010 on the chronograph wheel and HP 1300 on the pawl lever. So we don't want those 2 different lubricants to mix with one another. Chronograph bridge goes on, and we just need to make sure that our pawl levers are on the outside of that first reduction wheel or transmission wheel. Quick test shows that it is turning correctly, so they're very, very good. All right, 2 more screws holding this down. We'll get those nice and snug. Those are very, very similar to the 2 screws in the pallet fork bridge, but they are not the same. We already pre-lubricated the side of that transmission wheel you saw, so a little bit of HP 1300 on the top post. And I'm using a thinner lubricant here for the bearing. You can use Lubetta V106 9010, also works well. Quick cleanup. That's looking good. Now we can finally get our rotor back on here, and that's a keyed hole, so we'll just make sure that's in the correct spot. And we just need to brace this wheel so we can snug the screw as we do it. So we'll just hold the rotor in place with a little plastic tool. That will allow us to tighten down this last screw. Very good. And I do a test just to make sure that everything is, I push that movement ring back down, but I do a test there just to make sure that, that rotor doesn't hit anything. Next up, so we've been using this crown the whole time, but that's a new crown and stem. by default, it's too long. So we're going to need to trim this down. So with it fully in place, and that blue is just a protective coating on the back side of that, we'll peel that off. It's just like when you get a new phone or something, you got to peel the plastic off. Same thing on the crown. But you can see how much space we have there. So we need to trim this stem to fit this case. So I take a measurement just using a set of digital calipers. If memory serves, it was 2¼ millimeters, I think. But using a pin vise, we'll go ahead and unscrew the crown from the stem. And then I want to go ahead and just kind of put a rough marking. Yep, 2.25. Just use a rough marking to, Sharpie on the stem, just to kind of get me close to that gap. Right there, you can kind of see it. And I'm just, you can always go, cut it not enough. But once you kind of go over that, once you go too long, you can't add material back. You'd have to use an extender adapter or something. So I always intentionally cut the stem short of my mark, and I always make that mark intentionally barely short of my measurement. So when I do them, I know I'm going to be short the first time I test fit it, but then I retake a measurement and then slowly file it down just a tiny bit more until I can dial it in exactly where I want it. But once I do, I'm applying some blue Loctite, which is a non-permanent Loctite, but it will hold that thing solid. You can put it inside the crown. Someone actually made a comment once, said, you're doing it wrong. You got to put it in the crown, because if you put it on the threads of the stem, it'll just work its way out. Some does, but when you dip it in Loctite and then put it in there, like, more than enough stays in the crown to lock it down. I've never once had one come loose, but they are also correct. So I just lubricated the inside of the crown, but there we go. Fit nicely. Last gasket for this thing is going to be the case back gasket. So this is lubricated. You can kind of see it shining a little bit. It's got a layer of silicone grease on there, which will keep that gasket from twisting or getting pinched or just kind of protecting it, especially as we're tightening the case back down. But we want to make sure it's flat all the way around before we put the case back on. There we go. Moving it over to the big tool, we'll go ahead and tighten this thing down properly. It's using some plastic just to protect it. And I want to just do a quick function test again. Once this thing is finally all put together and finally tightened for the last time and everything's good to go. So just rotating this around, I'm watching the day and date windows and everything rolled over exactly like it should. Do a test of the quick set mechanism real quick. Day and date advanced like they should. Perfect. Go ahead and stop the chronograph. If I can press the button. Thank you. And do a reset. All right. And I was unsatisfied with that stop, so that was user error, not the watch. There we go. Another one. That looked good. And we'll go ahead and put his bracelet back on there. And so I actually made note. One thing I learned early on when I started doing other people's watches is when they sent me a watch, I always take a photo record of, well, several things. But one thing I take a record of is where they have their bracelet adjusted to. Because obviously during this process, every pin, everything's coming out of these bracelets. The clasp comes off and everything. So I refer back to that photo. That way, at least I can make sure I size the bracelet, at least in the position that it was when they sent me the watch. So hopefully, Jeff, hopefully the watch fit you right out of the box and you didn't have to adjust it. But I made sure it was in that third hole where I'm putting it now on your little micro adjust there. There we go. Clasp feels good. Didn't need to adjust anything there. But there we go. One running road rash bullhead. That's what we've been calling this thing on Patreon. I've been referring to it as the road rash bullhead, which seemed appropriate. But I'll tell you what, this watch came out well. I just love bullheads. Just something about them. I just think they're fantastic. They've just got so much character and presence, and not as big of a watch as you'd actually think they would be. You'd think they'd be gigantic, but they're small in comparison to a lot of the other Seiko chronographs. Thank you again to the patron members of this channel. It means the world to me. Our newest members, I'd like to recognize you: Rico, William, Alex, Andrew, Kevin, John, and Roy. Thank you so, so much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching, especially if you made it this far, all the way through this incredibly long video. I think with this one is the new record holder at this point, beating out the Walkman. Have to double check if it's within a minute or two. I am on Instagram, albeit not as often as I probably should be, but I do post stuff on there. Free viewers of the Patreon channel probably get free more updates, but if you check that out if you like. But that is the video, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for sticking with me. I hope you got something from it. But take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.